What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Ben on Sports. And as you can tell today by the background, we are doing the NHL. We have another hockey episode. How exciting is that? Haven't done one since the beginning of the season. I probably should have done another one by now, because now the timing is going to get weird. Because I like to do an All-Star one potentially. Definitely going to do a trade deadline one, and we're definitely going to do playoff predictions. But Anyway, we have an NHL update episode here, a little bit over halfway through the season. I hope you all enjoy this. Just a quick disclaimer before I get into the episode. All of the statistics mentioned in this are accurate through Wednesday, January 29th, before the game. So I guess it's really accurate as of the completed games on Tuesday, January 28th. Just so you know, if you watch this afterwards or anything, you're like, oh, that stat isn't right. Well, that's because of when it was updated by, if that makes sense. So now that we have that quick disclaimer, how about we just get right into it? Starting off, we're just going to look at the updated standings, and I'm going to give you where I kind of see them ending up. One of the big surprises of the season, maybe the big surprise of the season, the Washington Capitals on top of the Metropolitan Division at 73 points, which is currently tied for the league lead in points. They are legitimate President's Trophy contenders, and they already have a pretty decent lead for first place in the Metro. It might be the biggest lead in the NHL. It's definitely at least the second biggest, and they have a game in hand. They have a 7-point advantage with a game in hand over the next closest team. That's a pretty nice advantage to have. Are the Capitals Cup contenders? Maybe. I don't know if I buy them in the playoffs yet. I still think they're missing one surefire star. Ovechkin is starting to go cold after his fantastic start to the season. They still have some young guys that are performing well, like Alexi Protas, Connor McMichael, who's also cold for them. Pierre-Luc Dubois looks like he has resurrected his career. I still think they need at least one surefire star. Logan Thompson is the second best goalie in the NHL right now. That the D-core in DC is great. I'm a little bit worried about them come playoff time when they play against some of these teams with more star power, because sometimes star power means more than anything else in the playoffs. But as a team, they are one of the most elite teams in the league, one of the top offenses, one of the top defenses. They deserve their flowers. Second place in this division, excuse me, the Carolina Hurricanes, the only team that I think has a chance to catch the Capitals, and I think that the points gap will be closer at the end of the season than it is now. I love the trade the Hurricanes just made. Getting Rantanen and Taylor Hall is an incredible trade. I don't think they had to give up that much. They still have all their top prospects. They still have a good amount of draft picks. We'll probably talk a little bit more about that trade later, but that was a great trade by the Hurricanes, and I think it might make them the best team in the Eastern Conference when healthy. They've been great defensively, and I think that's going to help them be more consistent offensively and gives them another incredibly creative goal scorer and point scorer. Hurricanes, they're essentially a perennial playoff team at this point, and this year seems to be no different. The question is, when can they finally make the Stanley Cup run? The Devils started off hot. I think they've had a couple cooler periods. They were leading the division for a little bit, and maybe part of that was also because they've been playing more games than everybody else most of the season with that crazy start. But they're still looking good. It's a little bit unfortunate. They're dealing with some injuries now. I think the Devils are going to continue to be third. I don't think they can catch the Hurricanes or Capitals unless they get really hot. But I also don't see them dropping below the teams behind them. I think they're kind of comfortably in that 3 spot, and I think that's how they're going to finish. The Blue Jackets, better start than I think anybody thought they were going to have. Zach Werenski, Quinn Hughes and Cale Makar are 1-2, obviously, and are the best 2 defensemen in the NHL, but then it's like, who's third? And Zach Werenski is certainly putting his name in the hat and certainly making a push for that. I'm interested to see how the Blue Jackets continue to coalesce. This is a year that I thought they'd be trying to go towards a top 5 pick, and they're still competing despite all the way that their season started with the unfortunate passing of Johnny Gaudreau. And they're fighting for a playoff spot. We'll talk about the Eastern Conference wild card a little bit later. 7 points might be a little bit too much. They do have 2 games in hand. We'll see. I just don't see the Blue Jackets making a consistent run at the top 3. And I don't know if I buy them as a wild card team. I think they might slow down. Maybe they even make some trades at the trade deadline. I don't know. They definitely have some interesting choices coming up. Moving on to the Rangers, somehow are in 5th place in this massive jumble of teams in the Metro. Great start to the season, great first month to 6 weeks, then had an awful, I would say, month or two, went all the way to the bottom pretty much, traded away some long-term Rangers, guys like Kako, who was a lottery pick for them and was one of their best players, right? Traded away Trouba, traded away a lot of guys that had been part of that New York Rangers core that was that have been President's Trophy contenders and making playoff runs the last 2 or 3 years. They still have some of those guys, and obviously the big one for them is Igor Shesterkin, their big man in net. But I'll be interested to see how they finish the season. They're definitely not out of the playoffs. I think they definitely have the ability to make a run at the playoffs. And I think it's going to come down to what do they want to do with this roster? Do they want to keep doing this expedited retool, or do they want to make another run at the playoffs this year? I'll be interested to see where the Rangers are at the trade deadline, because there's definitely some pieces on that team that maybe they give up and get some even better pieces in return. Very interesting team. Definitely did not expect the Rangers to have the type of year they've had. The Flyers, a young and upcoming team, sometimes really good, sometimes not so good. It's very roller coastery, I feel like, for the Flyers this season. And they're still in the playoff hunt, led by one of the only 2 guys I foresee winning Rookie of the Year, at least with how the first part of the season is going, and Matvei Michkov. And we will see what happens with the Flyers. They have a legendary head coach, and they with a lot of young guys sprinkled in some vets, and it's really just going to come down to can they find consistent play with their young core. The Islanders, good thing they have some games in hand on some of the teams in front of them. They could very well end up right up there with the Blue Jackets. I mean, they have 1 game in hand on the Rangers, who are 2 spots above them, and if they win that game, then they're above them. So it shows you just how tight everything is in the Metro. And I think they've had some bad luck this season. I still think the Islanders might end up being sellers. There's a lot of teams in front of them in the Eastern Conference and I think enough, at least to the point where I think they decide, you know what, why don't we just try and trade some guys away that we know we're not going to keep, or we know don't make sense with our timeline. And I could very well see the Islanders doing that this season. And then last, the Penguins, more to come on them. I don't know what's happened to them this year, what happened to them last year. Not off to a good start. Maybe they can get super hot. It's going to take it a crazy streak. I mean, they're only 4 points back of the Rangers, who are in 5th, and they're in 8th, and they're not that far back of the Blue Jackets, but they also have played more games than all those teams in front of them. So that puts them at a little bit of a disadvantage. I think the Penguins are at a critical point. They have a lot of aging veterans with rich deals, and it's not adding up to success. So definitely a team to watch. I think they could potentially sell at the deadline, even though that might anger some of their long-term guys like Crosby and Malkin. And here you see my predicted standings. I don't have a whole lot changing. I just have like some of these really close point races. But overall, I think the Capitals, Hurricanes, and the Devils will make the playoffs out of the Metropolitan. And I don't think that they get a wild card team unless some things change. I think the Atlantic has a lot of really good teams as well. And I don't see in the current state, excuse me, in their current state with where they currently are in points, any of the teams being able to stay in front of the Atlantic teams. I also don't see any of these teams completely bottoming out and heading for top 8 to 10 odds in the lottery for the number 1 pick. I see even the teams that all these teams that don't make the playoffs, I still think they're going to end up towards the back half of the lottery. Moving on to the Atlantic. Man, the Atlantic race up front is tight, and I actually believe after last, the Panthers might be passing the Maple Leafs here soon, based off of the Wednesday night games. I've already explained that situation, but it definitely seems like the Panthers and the Maple Leafs could run away. The Senators and Bruins aren't completely out of touch, but I think you're pretty safe in assuming that the Maple Leafs and Panthers are going to be your 1 and 2 seed out of the Atlantic. It's figuring out everybody else. I mean, the gap from the third place, which keep in mind is a non-wildcard team, the gap from third place to seventh place in the Atlantic is 3 points. That is insanely tight. And when we look at the wild card race later, you'll see when you add the Metro teams and just how tight this is. The Eastern Conference is absolutely bonkers. Maple Leafs, they've dealt through and made it through some Austin Matthews injuries. I think the Maple Leafs are a more complete team now. They're not as reliant on offense as they have been the last couple of years, and I think that's good for them. I think it's good for them in the playoffs, and I think it's good for them in the regular season. The Panthers, maybe not on the same point pace as they have been in the past, but they are the Stanley Cup champs. I think they'll be fine, and when they get to the playoffs, their experience alone should be enough to scare teams. And like I said, both of those teams I think are playoff locks. Everybody knows who the Maple Leafs are. They know what kind of team they are. They know the guys they have. Same thing with the Panthers. You don't need to spend a lot of time talking about them. They've been I would say, two of the best 5 or 6 teams, most consistent teams the last 3 to 4 years in the NHL. The Senators were a team I didn't expect to be in this position this late in the season, but they're playing well. So there's definitely some guys stepping up for the Senators, making some jumps. And I think they're in a position where they could make some trade deadline trades and put themselves in a competitive spot come playoffs, because I do think that they're good enough to make the playoffs, and I think that there's a very real possibility that it happens. Something that hasn't happened a lot, or hasn't happened very recently, that is, in Ottawa. The Bruins, it feels like something's just off. They don't feel like the Bruins of old or the Bruins of the last couple of years, the Bruins that won the President's Trophy in the not-so-distant past. But they're still the Bruins. They still have Marchand. They still have Pastrnak. Excuse me. And those two alone with that core seems to be enough to keep them in the playoff hunt, and it should be in. There's still a very real possibility, in my opinion, that the Bruins get hot and maybe work their way up to the table and finish in the top 3 of the standings, just like they're used to doing. The Lightning at 55. Again, they're only 1 point back of the Bruins, but they have played 3 less games, and they played 1 less game than the Senators, who were only 1 point in front of them. So the Lightning could very easily, when they start catching up in games, be a couple points ahead of the Senators and Bruins. The Lightning definitely have the core to do so, and I need to apologize to the Lightning. They should also be highlighted red because they are also currently a playoff team. But yeah, I mean, the Lightning, they don't have Stamkos. They still have Kucherov. They still have Chiarelli. They still have Vasilevsky and net. They still have Hedman, their offensive defenseman. And they still have a lot of pieces of the core, while also trying to integrate some new faces, maybe in some younger faces, to stay in the playoff hunt. I still think they're good enough, and I still think that they end the season there. As you can see, I don't just have them ending the season in the playoffs. I have them missing the wild card altogether and getting that 3rd seed to play whoever doesn't finish first between the Panthers and Maple Leafs. And I truthfully believe the Lightning are good enough. I don't know if they're as good as they were when as they have been, where they make some deeper playoff runs. Obviously, they're not as good as the 3-peat team, but they are good enough, I think, to put a fright into somebody, potentially win 1 series. And I think it's incredibly likely they make the playoffs this season. The Red Wings, a team that missed the playoffs last year on the very last day to the Washington Capitals. And they're so close. They have a good team. They have some veterans, but they still are pretty young, right? Like, I'd say most of the Red Wings core is young, or at least younger, and they're a team that could be around for a long time. But I don't see them making the playoffs this year with just how good some of the other teams have performed. I think if the Red Wings do make the playoffs, I think it'll come at the expense of the Senators. I think the 4 Atlantic teams that are always in the playoffs still make it this year. But the Red Wings could be the bridesmaid once again in the sense that they come up just short. They're right in the playoff hunt the last week of the season, and they fall just short again. Maybe even a last day failure. The Canadians, I think, are on a much better point pace than people expected them to be coming into the season. They're definitely another one of those young teams that's trying to there's young up and comers that's trying to put themselves in the playoffs with all of these experienced older Eastern Conference teams with so many legends and star players. And I don't think this is the year. I don't think they're quite good enough. I do think next year, when as the players get more seasoned, they get another lottery pick. Maybe they make some signings. I think the Canadians could be there. It's been a long time in Montreal, and I think Montreal is one of the most deserving cities of a deep playoff run. I don't think it happens this year. I do think they slow down a little bit towards the end of the season. I don't see them keeping this pace up. So I think that they miss the playoffs by like 8 to 12 points here. And then the Sabres, awful start to the season. Tage Thompson is a star player. I firmly believe that. I don't know what the Sabres' problem is. They have more than one, so I guess you can't just say what their problem is when they have multiple. But the Sabres definitely have the talent to do better than this. They've been on a hot streak recently. They're just too far back, I think, to make a legitimate run. And I know you're saying, oh, they're only 12 points back, which in the grand scheme of things isn't too much. It is a decent amount, but when you have this many teams in between you and the playoffs, it's virtually impossible because you need way too many teams to have to perform bad down the stretch. And I think the Sabres would be better off just preparing to not be competitive this year and keep building for the future. Moving over to the Western Conference. The Central Division, which might be the best division in hockey. It definitely is at the top. The bottom isn't as good, but at the top, it's definitely one of the best divisions. You have the Jets tied with the Capitals for the President's Trophy lead. As you can see, I have the Jets finishing with 2 more points than I had the Capitals finishing with. You have the Stars, who I don't feel like have gotten anywhere close to their ceiling, and they still have one of the highest point totals in the NHL at 65. Boy, if they ever play to what I believe their capability is, that they play towards that ceiling, because it still feels like they're not all the way there yet as a team, they could be incredibly dangerous. The Wild, I think they're going to be hurt by the Kaprizov injury. I mean, he was in MVP conversations, and he still should be, but if he's out for an extended period of time, that's really going to hurt them as a team. But they're still in playoff position. In the Avalanche, those are your big 4 teams with a lot of stars on them. They've been playing the best, but I feel like they're your more sure product. And on the Avalanche, I'm very interested. They're still a playoff caliber team. Anytime you have Nathan McKinnon and Cale Makar, you should be in the playoffs. I am interested to see where some of their secondary scoring comes from now that Rantanen is gone. Who steps up to take some of those goals, because he was top 5 in goals when he got traded, or top 6. He has a lot of goals this season for the Avalanche, and it's not easy to just at the snap of a finger replace that. I know they got some players back. I do like Nietzsche's that they got back. I don't think he's quite at that level yet, but maybe he finds something in Colorado. The Blues are the Blues. They're always hanging around the playoffs. They have been the last couple of years. Feel like they're trying one of those expedited rebuilds where they don't have to bottom out like the Blackhawks are doing right now, and they just can't get the quite right pieces. They came close to the playoffs last year. I don't think they're going to be as close this year, but they're also not going to be one of the worst teams in the NHL where they get a high lottery pick. They're kind of in this no man's land, and I think eventually you have to make a decision one way or the other. I'll be interested to see if what they do in the trade market, as I definitely think they have some players that would be of some interest to some contending teams, and they probably don't need them in the short term. That's all I'll say. Utah Hockey Club, I mean, they're the Arizona Coyotes, right? Like, they're the same team as they have been. They're not the worst team in the league, but they can't make a legitimate playoff run. They're good enough to hang around and win some games and mess it up for everybody else sometimes, but they're not good enough to make the playoffs, and they're still the same team. I'll be interested to see if that franchise and that ownership group, that front office, can ever get it figured out. I think they've shown some signs of life this year, but they're just not there yet, and that's okay. It takes some time sometimes to build something good. Maybe going to Utah will help them get there. The Predators, the biggest disappointment of this season. The Nashville Predators spent all that money, brought in all that star power, all those good players, and they're at 43 points through 48 games. That is not very good. I think they'll get better as the year goes on. I think they'll continue to coalesce, but this is a team that should have been in the playoffs. This is a team that should have avoided the wild card, and it does not seem they're even going to get close to being a wild card team unless they have one of the best last 30 games, 32, 33 games in the history of the NHL. They're going to need a massive amount of luck. That just doesn't seem possible for them. But a lot of those guys are coming back next year. Maybe you get a good draft pick, somebody that can come in soon and be an effective player for you. But until then, I think I don't think it makes sense for them to lose a whole bunch of games. I think they just need to coalesce and figure out how to be a team, figure out how to play together, figure out or fix whatever needs to be fixed. And I think they can eat hot and be a spoiler this year, and then go into next year with rested with some momentum, knowing each other better as a team, because sometimes that happens when there is this many new players. And then the Blackhawks, not a lot to say. They're, quite obviously tanking. They have Connor Bedard, and who else, right? They're trying to get some guys to go with the young stud who has the potential to be the best player in the NHL in 5 to 10 years, right? Bedard was an all-time prospect. He's the reason why the Blackhawks started to tank, you could argue. And they're still not very good. Everybody loves Bedard, and you should. He's going to be a star for a long time. But can't do everything by himself, and I think he got off to a little bit slower start than some people were expecting. And I think that it's just going to be more of the same for the Blackhawks, at least for this year and probably the year after too. Moving on to the Pacific Division, another pretty darn good division. Let's start with the Oilers. Now, if you're watching, you will realize, I haven't talked much about my predicted standings because I'm kind of talking about it, but I'm not giving you specific point totals. But if you've been paying attention, you probably realize the Edmonton Oilers, while they are not currently leading, I have them winning the regular season, I guess is the way you can say it. I think they're going to finish with the most points. I think they're going to, at 116, 117. They're going to have some competition for that, obviously. But I see the Oilers winning the 1 seed in the West and having the most overall points in the NHL. They're at 67 points through 50 games this season. I think they only get better. Draisaitl having another incredible season, arguably been the best player in the NHL this year. You still have Connor McDavid, even after that 2-game suspension. And I think what's better for the Oilers is that their goaltending has been a little bit better and their defense has been a little bit better, where there's not so much pressure every night on their offense to score a whole bunch of goals. And I think that's the direction the Oilers need to go in. With what they have on the team, this offense is not the struggle for them. It's making sure they can play defense and get stops. And I see them making some trades at the trade deadline, 1 or 2, to really strengthen those things up and to be even more of an elite team than they already are. Golden Knights, I feel like they've kind of been quiet this season. I haven't heard a lot of the media talking about them, but they've been at the top of the point standings, I feel like, all season. They're holding pace with the Oilers. I feel like they've been first in the Pacific Division most of the season. The Oilers have just recently caught them. I think the Oilers and Knights are going to be battling most of the season, if not until the very last day, to be the first place and potentially even the 1 seed in the Western Conference. Jack Eichel, I think his defensive game has improved and more than people realize this season. And I also think, top 5 in MVP voting, I think Jack Eichel should be there. I think he's putting together a really good season, even if it's not being talked about. The Kings, arguably the best defensive team in the NHL. Kings have been playing great this year. I feel like they're the same Kings team they have been for the last couple of years. Really good defense. Sometimes the offense can be a little bit spurty, but they have good goaltending. They have good defense, and they don't give up a lot of goals. And that's helped them to get to 58 points. I think it's going to help them all the way to the playoffs this season. I don't really have a lot to say about the Kings. Sorry if you're a Kings fan. That's pretty much all I got. I respect the fact that they are a hard-nosed defensive team, and that's just kind of what they have been, right? The Flames at 55, making their way into the playoffs, kind of unexpected in a lot of ways to me. I don't know if they'll actually make the playoffs. I don't think that they will. I think they slow down, or maybe not slow down, but I think some other teams might catch up to them. I don't think they're bad, but I don't think they're great. I don't think they're one of the best teams in the West. I don't know. Although half of in the Eastern and the Western Conference, half the teams make the playoffs, right? So you don't have to be necessarily a top team to make it. Flames are kind of in this weird frame where they're kind of rebuilding, kind of retooling, kind of competing. I just think there's still a little bit confusion. I will be interested in them in the trade deadline to see if they trade away or try to trade for guys. But if I were them, I definitely wouldn't waste a whole bunch of future resources in trading for somebody, because I don't think the Flames are actually ready to compete. Definitely not with the top teams in the West. But still an impressive season so far. And I just don't think it's going to last. Then the Canucks at 54, 1 point out of the playoffs behind the Flames through 49 games. Bad luck. 10 overtime losses. That's a lot of points you didn't get. In some ways, maybe it's points you did get because you were lucky to get it to overtime, right? I think the Canucks find their way back in. I know I'm seeing a lot of rumors about them potentially trading some guys away at the deadline, but I do think the Canucks can compete with teams, some of the Cup contenders. Like, I think the Canucks can compete with the Knights and the Oilers in a 7-game series, and I wouldn't give up on the season just yet. The trade deadline in the NHL is, March 6th? So there's still some time for them to make a run, and I think that they're starting to heat up, make up for all those lost overtime games. JT Miller is apparently on the trade block, or might be, and he is, I would say, the biggest star available out of all the teams. I just don't see the Canucks trading, because I think the Canucks can still make a run. At least I don't think they should trade him. We will see what happens. And as you can see, I have the Canucks catching and passing the Flames, and have the Canucks in the playoffs. The Ducks doing a little bit better than I thought they were going to. They're definitely a rebuilding team. I don't have a lot to say about the Ducks. They're kind of a quiet team because it's like they're not good. They don't have really a lot of star players. They have some intriguing young guns, in which you're going to have when you're picking at the top of the draft. And this has been unexpected for them, in my opinion. It's not like they're doing great. They have 48 points through 50 games, right? Like, that's not a great total. But I think they're doing better than a lot of people thought they were going to. They're not going to make a run at the playoffs. I think they're going to kind of taper off a little bit here the rest of the season and start to fall back. In fact, I think the Kraken right behind them will pass them. And I think that, and really, I think long term, that's what's best for the Ducks, to try to get as good as a draft pick as possible to keep building a young core. The Kraken not scoring as much as I thought they would coming into the season from a point total perspective. I don't think they're the 7th worst team in their division. I definitely think they're better than the Ducks, and I think that the Kraken and Flames are similar teams to me, although they are separated by 8 points in 3 games. But I don't know. I don't think the Kraken are this bad, and they have been a playoff competitor like the last couple of years, right? The last 2 years at least. So I think they'll rebound a little bit in the second half, although I don't think the playoffs are a reality for them this season. And maybe their best move is to just kind of retool and get rid of some expiring contracts and pick up some picks and some maybe young guys, right? Maybe that's the best way for the Kraken to go. Then obviously last place, and the team that was expected to be last place coming into the season and will probably stay there, the San Jose Sharks, 36 points through 53 games. But do you really care about making the playoffs if you're a Sharks fan? No, you're kind of in the same boat the Blackhawks. You want the first pick. You want the second pick. however high you can get and get the best player available. And if you're the Sharks, it's all about the development of Macklin Celebrini, who is probably the front runner for Rookie of the Year, having a great rookie year. At least it's something for Sharks fans to get excited about with how poor, I guess you could say, the rest of the team is. The Sharks felt like they were a perennial playoff team for so long, and then recently they decided to go over a lengthy rebuild that they're still kind of at the beginning of. All power to them, but they're not going to get hot. It's not like they're going to have a lot of points this year. It's just not in the cards, and it's by design, right? Like, even if they're not coming out saying we're trying to lose games, they are trying to lose games. We'll see if they do anything at the deadline on terms of dumping players for picks or something of the sort. But yeah, the only thing that matters if you're the Sharks fan is Macklin Celebrini, right? All right, so that covers the divisions. You can see where I think people are going to stand. The last 4 slides, you see where they currently are, where I think they're going to end up. Let's get into these wild card races, because I think these wild card races, especially on the eastern side, are so interesting. So in the Eastern Conference, currently, the 2 wild card teams are the Bruins and the Lightning. The Bruins have 56 points through 52 games, and the Lightning have 55 points through 49 games. That's 1 and 2. The 8th place team in the wild card, it's really not the 8th place team. It's really the 14th place team when you take into account the 6 division leaders, 3 from each division. So it's really the 18th place team in the Islanders, which, if you're doing the math, means that all but 2 of the teams in the Eastern Conference are in the playoff race. And there's probably some Penguins fans that would argue with 48 points they should be in it too, but they've played more games than everybody else, so I don't think they belong there. Anyways, the Islanders are in 14th and 8th place out of these wildcard teams. They have 51 points with 49 games remaining. The Lightning in 2nd place and currently in the playoffs as wildcard team are 55 with 49 points, which means they are separated by 4 points with the same amount of games played. The gap from 1st to 8th is 5 points. The difference is the Islanders have played 49 games, and then the Flyers are also sitting there at 51 points, but they've played 51. Bruins are in first with 56 points through 52, so they've played more games. The Eastern Conference playoff race is insane because you have 8, potentially 9, if you believe in the Penguins, teams that can make the playoffs in the Eastern Conference. Who the heck is going to win it? There's approximately, just average it out to like 30, 31 games left for all these teams, maybe more, maybe less. Who on earth can make it? All of these teams have a legitimate chance, in my opinion. And I think one of the most interesting things to watch coming down the season is who is going to make the Eastern wild card race. What 2 teams are going to be wild card teams? I think you know who's making it out of the divisions. Well, at least 5 of the 6. I still think the Bruins and Lightning are both capable of running down the Senators. But I think you have a good feel of the 3 Metro teams and 2 of the 3 Atlantic teams that are going to clinch by being top 3 in their division. But this wild card race is absolutely insane. You don't know who thinks. Maybe all these teams try and make themselves better at the trade deadline to make a run. Maybe some of these guys are like, it's not our year. It doesn't make sense. We're going to trade away some guys, and they fall out of the race. Maybe somebody behind them does actually get hot, and they come charging up the standings. I find that incredibly unlikely, but it's still possible. Obviously, if you're paying attention, I like the Bruins and Lightning to both make it. Not that I actually have the Senators as a wild card team, but any of these teams could make it. And I love the chaos that has been the Eastern Conference wild card race. When you think about it, even last year, the last day of the season, there were still 4 teams that could make the last wild card spot in the Eastern Conference, and it seems incredibly likely that the Eastern Conference is heading towards that again this year. Western Conference, not as interesting. I only put 4 teams because there's only 4 teams that I think mathematically make any sense. And really, I don't think the Blues are good enough to compete and keep pace with these teams. So in my mind, it's really between the Avalanche, the Flames, and the Canucks. It's not quite as interesting. I think really the battle here is going to be between the Flames and the Canucks. I think it's going to be really fun to watch down the stretch because they're in the same division. They play each other. They're both Canadian teams, right? Uh, I think it'll be interesting. I think the Canucks get it from the Flames. I think the Canucks are still better. I just think they've had some bad luck and a worse start to the season. I think the Canucks run them down. I don't think the Blues will be here with like 3 or 4 weeks left. I think they'll be too far back. But maybe they find something in the tank and make a run at it too. And I think the Avalanche will, in the end up being safe. I know that the Flames and Canucks have 3 games in hand and could still catch the Avalanche pretty quickly with that. I just think the Avalanche figure out who's going to replace Rantanen after the trade, and I think they will make a run and separate themselves. Hence why I said it's coming. I think it's coming down to the Flames and the Canucks. Anyway, there's your wild card summary. We'll see what it looks like at the trade deadline, and we'll see what teams do. That'll be very important. What teams think they still have a chance. But man, look at that. Look at how closely bunched together those Eastern Conference teams are. That is crazy. So here's my theoretical playoff bracket. If the playoffs were to start today, this is what it would be like. I have the Capitals, the number 1 overall seed in the Eastern Conference, and the 1 seed in the Metro, meaning they would play the worst wild card team, which is the Bruins. And I guess technically right now it would be the Lightning, but I'm giving the Lightning the benefit of the doubt. I think they're going to win their Wednesday game, which would put them ahead of the Bruins. But I digress. Like I said, the Lightning are only 1 point back, and they have 3 in hand, so I think they would definitely finish ahead of the Bruins. But this is the theoretical playoff bracket. Actually, it's not the current one. It's a theoretical one based off of what I was just saying. Yeah, based off of where I think they're going to finish. So I was right. Capitals finish with the 1st seed in the East. They play the 8th seed, the 2nd wild card, the Bruins. Lightning and Devils are 2 and 3 seed in the Metro. The Maple Leafs are the 1 seed. No, the Panthers are the 1 seed against the 2nd wild card Senators, and then the Lightning and the Maple Leafs are the 2 and 3 seed. That's never happened before. Just like the Bruins and Maple Leafs have never played as the 2-3 seed, right? It's funny, I don't love any of these teams to make the Stanley Cup. Like I said, I'm a little bit wary still of the Capitals as a playoff team. I think they're a really good regular season team. I'll be interested to see if they can continue that success to the playoffs, but I think they'll be good enough to beat the Bruins. I do think that series would be insane. It would be 6-7. I think it'd be game 6 or 7 before the Capitals pull it off. I think it would be gritty. I think it would be heavy checking, low scoring hockey. Really fun to watch. I think the Capitals would pull it out. And then I think the Hurricanes would beat the Devils. I think that series might be a little bit more high scoring, but I think the Hurricanes are better defensively. Both teams can score. And like I said, I really, really like that Rantanen trade. And I also like picking up Taylor Hall, a solid middle 6. I know a lot of guys are going to say top 6. I think he's really a second line guy for the Hurricanes. We'll see. Maybe he does go to the first line. And I think that might give the push to beat the Capitals in a playoff series, especially a guy like Rantanen who has already won a Stanley Cup. I think the Maple Leafs are just better, deeper, a little bit more well-rounded than the Lightning. It feels like the Lightning dynasty and a lot of that core is kind of gone. I know I said they still had a lot of those guys, and they do, but I think they're a little bit too old to make a deep playoff run. I think the Maple Leafs are still young. And just kind of like I was saying with the Stars earlier, I don't think the Maple Leafs have quite figured out exactly who they are as a team. I still think and part of it's injuries and some other things, but I still think the Maple Leafs are not at their ceiling yet. And I think they get it done against the Lightning. And then I think the Panthers turn it on at the end of the season, and come playoff time, they are the defending Stanley Cup champs. Senators aren't really ready to handle that yet. Good season for them would be to just make the playoffs. And I think they lose to the Panthers first round. Then I have the Panthers and the Maple Leafs. That's never happened in the playoffs before either, especially not recently. But I think the Maple Leafs beat the Panthers. I think the Panthers deal with fatigue because they've won 1 Stanley Cup. They've lost 1 Stanley Cup the last 2 seasons. That's a lot of hockey to play. The Maple Leafs are a little bit fresher. And I think overall, I think the Maple Leafs are a slightly better team. and I think that the Maple Leafs will be able to score just a little bit more than the Panthers. I think that's another close, competitive 6-7 game series. Maple Leafs go to the Eastern Conference Final. Get the fans' hopes up. Maybe it's time to bring a Stanley Cup appearance to Toronto. And then the Capitals and Hurricanes. I think this would be another incredibly low-scoring, heart-checking series. Anytime the Capitals and Hurricanes get together, it seems like it's a close game, whether it's 7-6 or 1-0. They've played a lot of close games the last couple of years. These teams are familiar with each other. And I just think, as of right now, we'll see what the Capitals do if they do anything at the trade deadline. I think that had it before the big trade for the Hurricanes, I'd pick the Capitals. But after the big trade, I think that's going to be exactly what the Hurricanes need to get past them. And I think the Hurricanes win another deep 7-game series here of the Capitals to advance to the Eastern Conference Finals against the Maple Leafs, where I have the Hurricanes winning it and delaying the Maple Leafs' hopes of a Stanley Cup. Now in the Western Conference, the Jets, right? Incredible start to the season. They have the best goalie in the league as of right now. They have Kyle Connor and Dustin, they have two of the highest goal scorers in the league. They're the only team with 2 guys in the top 5. There's your offense, right? Two pretty consistent goal scorers with the best goalie. That's a good combination. And I think as a team, they're a little bit better defensively, and they would get by the Wild somewhat easily. I think the Wild can take a game, maybe 2, but I think the Jets pick up that win. The Stars and Avalanche, I think the Stars are deeper. I think the Stars deeper at every position. I think the Avalanche would be incredibly reliant on McKinnon and Makar, and I just don't know if they have enough supporting cast to compete with a team like the Stars, and I think the Stars would advance there. Knights and Kings, again, sometimes it's about well-roundedness and a little bit of star power. The Knights definitely have some star power. They're definitely, I think, a little bit more well-rounded than the Kings. Both of those teams can goaltend. Both of them can play defense, but I trust the Knights offense a lot more to win that series than the Kings. And then the Canucks, they sneak into the playoffs, but they play the best team in the league. I think that one goes 6 games, and then the Oilers eventually pull it out, with Vancouver losing some close games. Something that has become very common for them, unfortunately, this season. Oilers, Knights, I just don't see anybody stopping McDavid and Draisaitl in the playoffs. Definitely not the Knights. I think the Knights are good, but I just think the Oilers are on a mission after last season. I think the Stars-Jets is a little bit of opposing theories on hockey, and I think it would be a fantastic series. But I think the Stars win it in 6 or 7. I think they outskill the Jets. They may not have the raw goal-scoring power that some of the guys on the Jets do. I do think both of these teams have great goalies, and I think the Stars find a way to make another Western Conference Finals where they fall short to the Oilers yet again, and then the Oilers go to the Stanley Cup to beat the Hurricanes. I think the Oilers, I picked them to win the Stanley Cup at the beginning of the season, and I still have them there. I think the Oilers are on a different level of motivation this season. I think that they're going to figure it out, keep getting better and better, and find themselves hoisting the Stanley Cup trophy and being the first Canadian team to do so in a while. I just think they're extra motivated. And Connor McDavid's got to get one eventually, right? So that's how I would see my theoretical playoff bracket. There is some changes. I am happy that a lot of the teams that I picked at the beginning of the season still look as if they're going to make it at this point in the season. So maybe that's part of it. I want to be right at the beginning of the year, so I'm sticking with some of the teams that I liked. But anyway, that's how I see the playoff bracket that I have predicted to go down. Biggest storylines of the season that I see either shaping up or coming into the year. The Four Nations face-off. Everybody's excited. The turn of NHL level international hockey, Canada, Finland, Sweden, United States, instead of the All-Star game. I think this is a great move. I do have some complaints about the rosters for just about every team, but it's hard to do this, especially when they made the teams at the beginning of the season. The fact that the Capitals, the current President Trophies winner, has no players in the Four Nations face-off says a lot, and it probably says something about the point I was making about lacking a true star, and maybe that ends up being a strength. But enough about that. Four Nations face-off. You can have issues with the rosters all you want, but it's still going to be an incredible event. All four of these teams are going to be really good. It's definitely better than the All-Star game in a lot of ways, and it always is an extra sense of pride when you don your own country's uniform with your name, with your country's name on the front, representing an entire nation. And I think this is going to be such a big win for hockey, and everybody should tune in and watch it. It's been a big storyline all season, and I don't think that's going to change. Moving on, I've already talked about it, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much. Who will win the Eastern Conference wildcard race? It's always fun to watch these teams at the end of the season scramble to try and make the wild card. It's so like I said earlier, it's so close, and I think that's just going to be such a big point of emphasis because it can mean more than just who makes the playoffs. It can mean which direction what rosters are going and what teams decide to do at the trade deadline and what teams decide to do at the end of the season. I'm interested to see who or what other big players get traded before the deadline. We had Rantanen go, and I know that there was a contract thing going on there, but I still don't think anybody expected him to get traded. Definitely not this early. Definitely not to the teams that he did and the way he did, which the Blackhawks did terrible in that trade that they didn't get a better pick or more picks. That's just a little side note. I definitely think the Hurricanes won, although the Avalanche didn't make out bad. But for the Blackhawks to take on salary and an extra player and only get what they did pick-wise, that was kind of sad. Blackhawks didn't do well in that trade. But I digress. I'm interested to see if there's another big player. Does JT Mailer go? Do the Canucks decide to trade? Is there anybody that maybe nobody is really paying attention to? Do the Penguins decide to get rid of some of their star guys? And I don't think the Penguins can rebuild. More on that later. But I'm interested to see what happens because that's always a possibility. And I think that there is a potential that somebody from somewhere gets traded. And more importantly, who they get traded to. Who will win the West? I don't think, while the Western Conference wild card may not be as interesting, I think who wins the West, who gets that one seed is more interesting. You have the Oilers, you have the Stars, you have the Jets. There's quite a few teams all near each other at the top of the Western Conference. The Golden Knights are there as well. Who wins the West? Who gets the one seed? I think it's going to be important just for not playing in the 2-3 matchup. You'd much rather play a wild card team, I think. Who wins the West? Who gets that home ice advantage all the way through the Stanley Cup is so important. It's going to be fun to watch those great teams, Stanley Cup contending teams, try and win it as the season winds down. The grade 8, everybody knows. Alex Ovechkin, one of the greatest goal scorers, maybe the greatest goal scorer of all time. Can he get Gretzky's record this year? Had the best start of to a season of his career this year. And then got hurt, and he was still kind of good, but he's kind of, I think, slowed down a little bit the last couple of games. Maybe he gets going again. Can he catch Gretzky this year? He still has at least one more year left on his contract, I believe. It feels like every night he's making history. Can Alex Ovechkin catch Gretzky? A. B. Can the team avoid it from being a distraction in a season where they have a chance to make a Stanley Cup run with how well they've played? And 3, can the Capitals actually continue to win at this rate? The last couple of years, and really since they won the Stanley Cup in 2018, they haven't won any playoff series. And a lot of people have said the last 2 or 3 years, it feels like it's more about let's get Alex Ovechkin to the record than it is let's win games. But this season, they're doing both. Can they continue to do both is my question. And can Ovechkin finally catch Gretzky? That's kind of a team one and a player one. And on the other side, Ovechkin's longtime partner, rival, I guess I shouldn't say partner, but partner in marketing for the NHL, really helped the NHL grow and get big. Sidney Crosby in Pittsburgh. What's going on with Pittsburgh? Last year they had an incredibly slow start, almost came all the way back to make the playoffs. This year a really slow start. They're starting to get footing. They're footing a little bit, but you still have Crosby and Malkin and Letang and Carlson, and they still have so many great players. What's happened to them? Why can't they get going? I think there's some frustration between guys like Sidney Crosby in the front office, which mean you're not really going to be able to rebuild, and you can't trade Sidney Crosby or get rid of him because he's the best player in franchise history. Sidney Crosby is like the guy, right? You're never going to trade somebody that's that important to a franchise, but at the same time, Crosby wants to compete for a Stanley Cup. He wants to win another one for understandable reasons. That's the goal of playing, right? But it doesn't feel like he can do that in Pittsburgh, at least in the time being. What happens with Pittsburgh? Do they start trading some guys? Do they try and free themselves up to make moves this summer? Can they make the playoffs? And how does Sidney Crosby wind down his career, especially if Pittsburgh continues to struggle? I think that's a really big storyline. And then lastly, who wins the race to the bottom? Which one of these teams is going to finish with the best lottery odds? Eventually, it'll be which team can win the lottery eventually, but it seems like it's a race between the Sharks and the Blackhawks again to tank for the one pick. They definitely have the lowest point totals by far in the NHL, and I'm interested to see who gets to the bottom first between those two teams and gets the best odds for a lottery pick between those two rebuilding teams. And the last thing I want to talk about, current power rankings. I'm only doing 10, and then where the award races stand now. There's definitely some changes and updates I want to make from the first episode. So you can see my current power rankings. Oilers 1, obvious reasons. Capitals 2, they're contenders. They're tied for the point lead. And actually the team they're tied with the point lead for has done it in more games than them, so they have games in hand. The Jets, one of the best starts of the season I've seen in a long time. They're really in the same boat as the Capitals, tied with the Capitals for the point lead. The Stars, I still really like the Stars, even if they've been up and down a little bit this year. I do think they're going to figure it out, and I really like their talent. Hurricanes, after that Rantanen trade, went from top 10 to top 5. Golden Knights, right there, right? I think that top 6, in my opinion, that top 6 and maybe the Maple Leafs or Panthers are really, really your Stanley Cup contenders. The Wild at 7, who could quickly drop due to injuries, especially to their MVP best player, Kirill Kaprizov. Maple Leafs and Panthers mainstays in the top 10, and the Devils are still in 10. They were higher up on my list, but as I said, it's not that they've been playing bad. I think their point percentage has slowed down a little bit, but they're still a good team, and I personally wouldn't want to play them, especially in the playoffs with all of that young creativity they have on offense. So let's go through the award races, and like I said, give an update on where they are and who I think the front runner and the runner-up is right now. Hart Trophy, I think Draisaitl has it. It's kind of funny that you're the most valuable player on a team with McDavid. McDavid did have a 2-game suspension. I just feel like Draisaitl's having the best season of his career, and for the first time ever is on pace to outpoint Connor McDavid, and for that alone, he deserves it. And then Nathan McKinnon is right there, and in both points and goals, at least with where like he has been historically. He won it last year. Nobody has really won one back-to-back in a while. I think McKinnon has a chance, especially if he continues to do well and potentially does even more with the absence of Rantanen. Vezina Trophy, Hellebuck, I think is almost undisputed, has it. And then Logan Thompson, I think, is undisputed second. I think these guys are unquestionably have been the first and second best goalies in the NHL this year. And then it's everybody else. Obviously, these guys can slow down and introduce other people into the race. But I think right now it's can Logan Thompson catch Connor Hellebuck and claim the trophy. Logan Thompson, an incredible story. We all know what Hellebuck does. He's won these before. We'll see. But I think those are quite obviously the first, quite obviously 1 and 2. The Norris Trophy coming into the year. I said it was going to be Cale Makar and Quinn Hughes. And 50 games into the season, it's Cale Makar and Quinn Hughes. It feels like it's always these two, at least the last couple of seasons, and I think it's going to continue to be this way. They're clearly the 2 best defensemen in the league. I don't think there's a lot of argument there. If there's anybody that can crash the party, it could be Zach Werenski for the Blue Jackets with the way he's played, but I don't think he's quite on that level, and I trust Makar and Hughes to continue that level of play more than Werenski. The Selke, I think Barkov is clearly ahead. And then I think after Barkov, I think it's getting competitive, and I think Barkov is starting to fall back to the pack. I actually really like Jordan Staal. I feel like he almost deserves the award for a legacy thing. He's been playing 15 years, and he's always been an excellent, excellent defensive center and has never won it. partially because there was somebody up in Boston hogging the award for so long. But I really like Jordan Staal, and I think he's right there for no other reason than his whole career and the fact he's never won it and arguably deserves it. But there's a lot of guys chasing him, like Heeshear, and 2 or 3 others. But I put Staal there for that reason. I respect his career, but Barkov right now is the elite Selke candidate. The Calder Cup best rookie. I really like Stankoven coming into the year. I really like Michkov coming into the year. Michkov right now is the runner-up, but Macklin Celebrini's having an incredible year for the Sharks, and I think unquestionably deserves it. I don't think he's completely separated himself. I still think Michkov is close enough where he could make a run. Whether it's Celebrini slowing down or Michkov continuing to get better, it's not over yet. But Celebrini, I would say, is looking good for the Calder Cup. Rocket Richard, this one has literally zero opinion whatsoever. It's literally just the Rocket Richard and the Art Ross is literally just statistics, right? Leon Draisaitl leading the league in goals and Sam Reinhart is second. And I think that Draisaitl keeps it up, and I think Draisaitl wins the Rocket Richard this year. Art Ross Trophy, most points. Right now, Nathan McKinnon is there, and part of the reason why I think he could win the Hart Trophy is because he's winning the Art Ross right now. And then Kucherov, he's always there. He's such an elite power play player, but I think he relies on it a little bit too much to be in Hart Trophy consideration, but he's still scoring a lot of points, even without Stamkos, which is still really impressive. Jack Adams Award, is there really any conversation? If the season ended today, the award would have to go to Spencer Carberry. Nobody would have expected the Capitals to be playing as well as they are. He has a couple of new players, but he's really infused the young guys with the old core that's still there. Really has the Capitals playing well. Seems like a bright young coach in this league. And I don't think right now any coach is touching Spencer Carberry for the award. Obviously, things can change. And I also like John Hines for the Wild because I think they're kind of outperforming expectations, maybe not as much as the Capitals. But there's some stuff going on in Minnesota. And now without Kaprizov, he really has a chance to show that he's just as deserving as Carberry for the Jack Adams Award. How can you navigate without your best player? Spencer Carberry had to navigate without Ovechkin, and the team's offense didn't suffer too much. Can John Hines do the same thing with Kaprizov? Then the President's Cup, I think it's going to come down to the guys out west. I think the Oilers continue to heat up and finish the season really strong to get the President's Cup and the number 1 seed. And I think the Winnipeg Jets finish just barely right behind them. I think the Jets and the Oilers are going to be so fun to watch, and maybe even the Stars down the stretch when just to see who finishes with the most points. Obviously, the Capitals are contenders. They're currently there, and I think the Capitals get the 1 seed in the East, but I think they finish maybe only 5 or less points off of these teams. It could honestly, I think the Capitals are the 3rd contender here. I just see the Oilers finishing the season really well, getting the number 1 overall seed, winning the Stanley Cup. And that's pretty much where I'll leave it for this episode. I'll see you guys later for hockey. We have a NBA episode coming up next week, followed by a NASCAR episode coming up 2 weeks from now. As always, please like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know your picks the rest of the way. Let me know how you feel. Maybe you disagree with some of the teams I think are good. Maybe you disagree with some of the teams I think are bad. Maybe you think I didn't talk about something enough. Leave all that stuff in the comments. I like to respond to the comments when I see them. So please put your comments down below. Please like, please subscribe. It helps me. That's how you can help me the most as a creator. If you like the content, if you want to see more, that's the best way to encourage me to do so and to help me out. Come follow me on X at BenOn_sports. I have fun on there. The more interaction I get on X, the more I post and talk to people. I have a lot of time on my hand right now, more than I have had recently and in the past. So I have nothing else better to do but to sit on Twitter all day and talk to you guys, sit on YouTube all day and talk to you guys. Thank you for taking time out of your week to listen to the podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys are watching the NHL and hockey. It's a really good sport that more people need to give love. Have a good week. I'll see you next time. Peace.